Welcome to the road to Acapulco. There's a new idea in town, an idea that's been heralded by Bob Podolsky for 32 years. It's an idea that will change the world, and it's beginning to take shape in Acapulco.
Hello, and welcome to another version of The Road to Acapulco. This is episode 19, The Drawbacks of the Octologue. And this is Michael Nimetz, and I'm here with Bob Podolsky today on a sunny summer day in Acapulco, Mexico.
Yeah, it's almost a rarity. Summer and sunny. This is the rainy season.
So what we're going to try and address here today is what I started out as was talking about is some of the criticisms that I heard about the Octologue, or what people might view as drawbacks. There's not too many people that really understand organizational development and that type of thing. Not many look into it at depth. But there is a great deal of effort put into it by the state and all of its organizations. They have a hierarchy established in just about everything that they do. And that means that they're organized. And that's something that people that have gone against the state have always seem to have a problem with is organization. And so for me, I think having a method of organization that retains the ethical standards that anarchists, for example, hold dearly is something that's very important. And honestly, I think it's probably one of the most important things. And so this is why certainly another reason why I'm really hardcore about the Octologue. But there are other people that see it as other things. And so we're going to talk about a few of those today and maybe dispel some of those criticisms.
Well, I hope so.
So the first one is from an article I was just recently reading about Mexican cartels adopting a horizontal organization, a cell-like structure that's something that the Al-Qaeda and ISIS use. Horizontal organizations. That seems to sound like possibly something associated with an Octologue.
An Octologue certainly is horizontal insofar as no one is in charge of anyone else. There is no power structure. And the idea of power structures goes back at least 8,000 years to Sumer, where they invented government. It's basically taking on the industry of power brokerage. And in doing that, they created cartels in that industry called government. So government is a cartel in a power brokerage industry, and its purpose is to preserve itself and maximize the profits of its members. And government does that pretty effectively. So in a tyrannical regime-like structure, it's a very useful tool to have hierarchy. Information and commands flow down, and hardly anything flows up, other than the wealth of those who are plundered by the system. So, there's a lot to be said about cartels or any other organization using a non-hierarchic structure because it's more resilient than the hierarchic structure when the two are in competition on equal footing.
Well, in that article, it talks about the U.S. government's approach to getting rid of the drug cartels in Mexico. They essentially had this policy of cutting off the head of the snake. That was the idea of destroying the cartel through getting rid of their leadership.
Right.
Interesting how they look at that from their point of view. I kind of feel like even the hierarchy is kind of really a misconception, especially when it comes to government, because the real power brokers that control government aren't in the hierarchy. They're basically outside of the hierarchy. They create that hierarchy as kind of a representation of their control. But the reality is that, like, for example, the president isn't really the man in charge. If he says the right things and does the right things, he can maintain that stature. But the reality is if he does the wrong things, he's going to be exposed, potentially impeached or assassinated, or one of the other things that can happen to a president.
Right.
Or maybe just flip-flop, when he gets presented with the correct information. So to a large degree, even in their system, hierarchy doesn't really work.
It has certain kinds of efficiencies that the controllers of the hierarchy lack. We really don't know the answer to the question, what about the fiat bankers who own the government? Do they have a hierarchy? I don't know what they have, frankly. I think you'd have to be an insider to really answer that one. I suspect they are relatively horizontal in their organization, although there are, of course, rumors that the organizations are controlled by the Illuminati, or they're controlled by the Vatican, or some other prominent group in history. But I think largely they have common interest in terms of similar character structure, similar lack of morality, and on that basis they're able to get a lot done. And they own the government, they control it, and the voter cannot. We are not in a position to do anything to change government short of revolution. And at this point in history, revolution might be what they want in order to get us out of having individual countries and into a worldwide power structure.
Yeah, I was just thinking the other day, obviously yesterday being the 4th of July, you see a lot of stuff about Independence Day and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the whole idea of Independence Day was about us being independent, or the U.S. being independent from Britain due to the instigation of a tea tax. I don't know if it's quite that simple, but the reality is today is, what exactly is the difference between the United States and Britain? If people are celebrating their independence from Britain, or from any other country for that matter, let's say Canada, for example, celebrating its independence, they're both basically in the same boat. I mean, all the citizens are essentially being taxed at a relatively similar rate. Some get more benefits and have more taxes, and some get less. But the reality is that pretty much all the global things going on in the world are similar.
Yes, absolutely. This is the thing that has motivated me for 40 years, actually. I've been concerned about how do we break out of that pattern. And it's a result of that concern that today we have an Octologue definition that includes tools that weren't present when we first started. It's something evolving. And I'm very excited to see it evolve.
So, sorry about the tangent there, but let's get back to the criticism of the Octologue being like a terrorist cell organization, where each group of, a small group of people is a cell with a particular purpose, and that they don't really know what's going on in the rest of the organization other than their particular purpose.
Well, for starters, an organization made up of octologues, a whole man, for example, is just the opposite. That information within that structure tends to be universally available, as opposed to groups, everything is secret from one another, which is the terrorist cell or the insurgent cell and so on, spy cells. They typically operate independently without having any communication with one another. We're doing the opposite. This is an open source endeavor. We're letting the world know what we're doing. And we're not, there's very little that we're hiding. I'm not saying we're not hiding anything, because if everything was totally public, we might get destroyed before we get to our goal. And there are people who would destroy us if they knew what we're up to, because they would realize that what we're doing is significant. Something very important historically is happening here in Acapulco. Everyone in this community is a part of it.
Well, I would say that one of the things that I think gets lost is essentially this idea that the Octologue is essentially about having a circle of trust.
Right.
And so in developing trust, essentially it's inviting the members of the Octologue to have a better understanding of, who you are as a person, more into, your private life and your private interests and concerns. And so by doing that, you're getting a much greater level of trust. But that's not to say that you're not pursuing a particular purpose. So if an Octologue is established to do a particular thing, like a business or something like that, it's not something that's secret.
Right.
It's something that's overt.
Absolutely.
And so other people around the world know that this is the expertise in that particular area, and essentially are inviting information to be gathered into that circle.
Right. Right. We welcome other people into what we're doing. And we know that what we're doing benefits the people who join us. We see it all around us, and it's accelerating. And I think that the spread of that benefit is going to be viral. It'll go exponential at a certain point. And suddenly, it'll seem sudden, 40 years of working towards it, and then suddenly we're successful, by golly. I expect that. And I don't see the cell-like nature of what we're doing as a drawback. I do see that there are people who are painted that way because they don't like what we're doing. We are destroying the model that says everything has to be hierarchic. And that has been, for the last 8,000 years, that has been the primary model for all institutions. It was that invasive. It's like it too is like a virus. It's moved into everything. Almost every business, every institution, every school, every university, every broadcasting company, every cable company, every magazine publisher, they're all hierarchic in their organization. Everything. And we're basically coming along saying, that's the problem. Get rid of that and put something ethical in its place, and suddenly everything's going to change for the better in a big way. So that's where we're headed with it, and I'm glad you called attention to that particular instance of how it's been misrepresented.
So the second criticism is something that I guess comes out of the counterculture and this idea of what they would call tribalism. Essentially, people getting away from their families and towards something that more suits their particular interest. So it's almost got a flavor of cultish in nature, that we're going to create some kind of tribe, and that tribe is going to be more important than things like family. Is there any problem between the Octologue and people's family?
Quite the contrary. We very much have the potential to be very supportful of families that need support. There is a book. I wish I could remember the title of the book, but it's something like Beyond Democracy. It's by the author of the book Ishmael. I may have gotten the title of this book wrong, but the idea that he presents is that what we need more of in the world, if we're ever to survive, is a kind of tribalism. That in fact, it's the lack of certain tribal values that have been one of the major components in winding up where we are today. What he says is that tribalism is basically a regard for the common economic system. In other words, people in a tribe are people who seek to help one another make a living, to meet their needs,
to promote their own well-being.
Yes, individually and through the group. The group can contribute to that. People's individual needs are better served when there's a certain kind of awareness within the group. In that sense, by his definition, we are manifesting an ideal form of tribe. In fact, yes, we know how to make a living together without exploiting each other. We know how to make important decisions ethically so that our decisions aren't hurting people. We care about these things. The people running the world now only care about themselves. They're narcissistic psychopaths. And they do not care about you or me unless we come in conflict. And they're absolutely ruthless towards people who they see as in conflict with them. Absolutely ruthless. They'll kill millions, hundreds of millions of people rather than give up any part of their power. And we have to learn to deal with that. We have the mechanism that will have what I think is as good an effect as can ethically be achieved by any means. I think we're really onto something here. This idea is self-perpetuating like nobody's business.
Well, if I've done a little bit of research into things like the American Indian tribes, and from my understanding of how the organization ran as far as a tribe is concerned, was that it was more like a meritocracy, where the individual men of the tribe were essentially given a feather for every time they did something that was brave or was recognized as excellent within the tribe. And so then, as they started to collect feathers, of course, you see the big Indian chief with the huge headdress of a ton of feathers. Essentially, that represented to the rest of the group, the rest of the tribe, as the person that was the most honorable person in the tribe was essentially part of the concept.
And the tribe obviously had to have taken on the value of honor in order to portray to everyone who could come within vision of him, portray the chief as the most honorable man. They had to care about honor. And that means they had an ethical basis. And their success, and they were very successful, their success really depended upon maintaining that honor. And the people who invaded had none.
Yeah.
They were unhonorable. They were vermin to those who were already here. And in the United States, best estimates are something over 200 million people live there in the Northwest. Maybe as much as 300 million, maybe as much as live there now in the United States. And most of them were slaughtered. It is just a history of slaughter. We're changing that.
I'm not sure exactly what to believe in regard to that, because I've never seen the evidence of exactly what the estimates are. But I do know that the United States government made treaties with the individual Indian tribes, and essentially in every single case broke the treaties and stole land.
Stole land and other resources and killed.
What's interesting is I was just listening to a thing about Sitting Bull and the kind of his surrender to the American troops in the late 1800s. Essentially, he tried to run away and go into Canada, but they weren't really well suited for the area that they were living in. So they ended up basically coming back to the United States and surrendering to the idea of the reservation. And when they did that, they essentially separated them into individual living quarters. They assigned them to particular living quarters all over the reservation. So they didn't want them to be together.
Oh,
They
really?
wanted to put them apart from
Isolate
each other. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and of course, they also told them they couldn't hunt, that they could basically hunt livestock. They could shoot livestock in a pen, but that was essentially the level of hunting that they could do. They could no longer hunt. And so essentially they destroyed their whole lifestyle, in penning them into a reservation.
Still using that technique today on everyone in the States.
Yeah, I
see
think
that.
I
really
think
see that.
our current existence is certainly a lot to do with the experiments that they did successfully to the Indians to
Right.
destroy their
Right.
liberty.
And the idea of destroying the family is a key part of that. They've been pretty good at that, But when families can form octologues and join octologues, and octologue with their neighbors, and octologue with the local businesses who are also comprised of octologues, it'll be very hard for any kind of opponent to that system to get a foot in the door. All they can do is attack physically. But if this is ubiquitous, if it's everywhere, we're going to get real tired. They're going to run out of any kind of support.
Well, certainly one of the main tools of the whole statism cult is this divide and conquer kind of idea. And certainly that is something that the Octologue is prepared to go against. Because if people that are involved in Octologues are certainly going to have a much greater level of trust to their fellow Octologue members than they are to some external propaganda that that could potentially divide them. But that's certainly worked through the media and through the schooling system. I just had a little thing about my military experience. Wrote a little article about that.
Mm-hmm. I read it.
And I felt like one of the things that as a young man, I kind of fell for the propaganda. Instead of trusting my parents and my grandparents and their influence, I trusted this idea that I was, serving a debt to society. I was basically going to pay that off by joining the military and doing my community service.
Right, you bought it. And we all bought it. When we're little kids, we all buy into it because it's all we know. They tell us things that we have to believe in order to survive. Don't walk in the street, it's dangerous. Well, yeah, if I don't believe them, I die. So I learn to trust what they say, and then they tell me all these falsehoods, and I trust those too. Not because they're right, but because survival meant that when we were infants and toddlers, and for a while after that. And then one day we turn around and find out, oh my gosh, we've been lied to all this time. Yeah. And we wonder, how in the world can we have a society where that doesn't happen? Where people are honest and straightforward and tell the truth with each other and live in peace. Oh, by golly, now we know how. It's just a matter of finding people who want to do it with us.
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, the thing that the Octologue really empowers people as individuals to essentially have those discussions, have those really meaningful discussions with each other, and kind of practice those meaningful discussions and understand what the things are. Because I feel like, and I see it similarly, with my friends and family that have children now and their children are expressing interest in the military, and they're trying to convey to their children this might not be such a good idea, but it's hard to really get down to the nuts and bolts of what is the problem when they've had 12 years of indoctrination from the schooling system.
Just like we
that
did.
essentially says, your parents really don't know what the hell they're talking about. You're the one that needs to make the decision, and they're just old fogies that don't know what really is going on now.
Wow.
So the third criticism that I've heard in regard to the Octologue is this idea of collectivism. And certainly, I've followed G.W. Griffin for a long time. He's probably the guy that most identifies with the word collectivism. He's certainly identified the horrors of it. And we've got a kind of a close relationship with him.
Yes.
He spent the day here with us on one occasion.
Yes, and we had lunch the day before. That was really cool talking with him. And the important thing that he brings up is that if the group's more important than the individual, terrible things happen as a result. But that's how governments are run. People are convinced that somehow the individual owes it to the collective to be obedient and supportive. And that is fallacious. That is illogical, unethical, wrong. But what are they teaching the kids in school? Well, they're teaching things that are even more obedience-oriented than what you and I were taught when we were in school. We had a lot more freedom 40, 50, 60 years ago. We had a lot more freedom than people do today. And most people alive today don't know what was lost because they never experienced it. Terrible. I'm rambling. Bring us back.
Well, the idea, like you said, of the collective as being more valuable than the individual doesn't really represent the Octologue at all.
Right.
Obviously, it's a group of people that come together, and it's for a particular purpose.
Right.
Could an Octologue own a business? Could an Octologue own a park?
Absolutely.
Could an Octologue own a road? Yes, it could.
Anything you can do in a hierarchy, you can do in an Octologue. And more. There's more freedom built into the Octologue than there is into the system of governance that we are living under for the most part.
But with the idea of an Octologue owning something, which would kind of meet the needs of, or meet one of the definitions of one part of the idea of a collective. But what it doesn't do, that a collective would do, is that it allows each of the members a veto. And so if there is something being done that's unethical, essentially each of the individual members has the ability to dissent. And
so put a stop to it.
Stopping whatever it is that they're doing.
Right. Right. It goes back to the story about the starting and stopping the conveyor belt when setting up the factory. I really see a parallel there. That we have a group where anyone can stop things. Anyone can veto a decision by the group. It has to be unanimous or it's not a group decision. That gets around a lot of problems that you see in most institutions.
Well, and I think it also empowers people to stop things like what I think a lot of people find in groups is something they call groupthink. Mm-hmm. This idea that if someone starts moving towards a particular direction, and that seems like a good idea, pretty soon everybody's involved, and because everybody's involved, if anybody dissents, they're going to be thrown out of the group.
Outcast.
Yeah.
Quite right. This is a very empowering technology that we're promoting. And I think that what you just said leads very well into the thing I wanted to bring up, which is sometimes seen as an obstacle or drawback in the Octologue, is that a good Octologue requires a level of honesty and feedback among the members. And until recently, I saw that as a non-issue because I hang out so much with people who are honest. I'm used to that, but then I recognize that that really is a minority of the world who tells the truth. Most people lie much of the time. And usually the lies are simply repeating things they've learned from other liars. Though there are those who originate the lies, and that has to be dealt with. But telling the truth isn't that easy, because I can only be as honest with you as I am with myself. If I'm lying to myself about who I am and what I represent, and what my life is about, if I'm not honest with myself about that, how can I possibly be honest with you? And that kind of honesty that I'm talking about is something that the Octologue needs. It's fundamental to it. And when it's there, it's a wonderful thing. I go into groups where people give feedback readily, and I'm eager for the feedback they have for me, because I know it's important, it's meaningful. Sometimes it's distorted in terms of what I really need, but it's meaningful. It tells me things. I recommend that to other people, and it's in that vein, or in that spirit, that I've brought soul bonding into the world. And this is a result of kind of an end product of 40 plus years of work. And the book's coming out shortly. We're looking for artists who might want to have their work appear on the cover. And it's getting really exciting that here's something that has been in the making all those years and finally will come to fruition this summer. I'm hoping it will be available to the public not later than the end of August. And that seems like a difficult goal, but probably realizing to reach.
Yeah, well, I would say that in that regard, I think a lot of people, to some degree, certainly in most of Western societies, have really kind of learned this kind of political correctness, or some might call it tact, some might call it, etiquette.
I call it being full of shit.
But the bottom line is that, like, for example, you go to a family event, and there's a couple things that you're certainly not supposed to discuss when you're at a family event. Nothing about politics, nothing about religion, right? These are kind of things that really kind of hold us back from the truth, and is something that really is encouraged in the Octologue to essentially address these kind of things.
Right. Give up that pussyfooting around it.
So, like, if someone comes up with a great idea, usually, I think, and I've seen this happen in the Octologue environment, where people, almost automatically look for, or become like the devil's advocate. What are the things that could possibly go wrong with this? And then we discuss those things. And so I think that, once you start to get in the habit of, not only just looking for great ideas, but also looking for what could potentially go wrong with those ideas, and certainly having a breadth of experience amongst the members, you really can drill down to some really fine points, which I think adds up, meaning that your chances of success once going through that process are going to be much greater.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the environment that
formula for success,
that we're trying to perpetuate in the Octologue. But as you said, with the soul bonding, it does revolve around each individual addressing some of the truths that they have within their own self. And to a large degree, a lot of that stuff is kind of hidden. Some of the assumptions that we have about people. And I'm getting pretty good at this because I've been obviously reading Bob's book and kind of understanding this more every day. But when I talk to other people, and some of these people are very well-to-do people, but I hear little limiting beliefs coming out. I can't do this, I'm just not that kind of person who does that. And well, exactly when did that come about? Because that's just a limiting belief. And this is some of the stuff that the soul bonding part of the Octologue can bring about a resolution to. Because a lot of these assumptions that we make about ourselves aren't necessarily true.
Oh, they seemed true when we were little people, infants or toddlers. Then it seemed true. We had to deal with that perception, and we're still dealing with it as if it were still true, and it's not. So that means we can evolve.
I was just thinking of another possible criticism. It's certainly something that I've experienced, engaging in business over the years, and that's this idea that you get people together, you can't really get people to agree on anything. If you try and do like a partnership in a business, oh boy, talk about a headache. Trying to work with somebody else in a partnership, all the expectations and stuff that could potentially lead to disaster in a partnership. Oh my God, how can you get anybody to work together when you can't even get two people that are interested in the same thing to work together? So how do you think about that kind of criticism? Getting people to work together. And then I think
there is absolutely no better mechanism for teaching people how to overcome things that are wrong. I think it's a perfect or near perfect teaching vehicle so that people can learn to do things together cooperatively and peacefully. One of the things I'm known for saying is that typically relationships between people involved in business together suck. Those relationships usually suck. And there are good reasons for that. It's not like the reasons for that are a mystery. We know why such attitudes prevail. And the soul bonding addresses that obstacle. It's a piece of technology to deal with that, precisely that kind of obstacle. And it does suck. And once we get free of some of those paradigm reactions that we have to those around us, we can have much, much better relationships. I feel very, strongly that as we open up to these ideas, we open up to our core feelings and core awareness. It's almost a mystical experience. And for some people, that's something that is very appealing. It's not something I have long sought myself, but I'm aware of that. And people who care about that will find it very fulfilling. I must admit I've had some run-ins with people who are very spiritual, who couldn't understand why I do not value spiritualness or spirituality. I do have experiences that I cannot explain rationally. I have a sense of being connected to the universe at times, but it's very personal and intimate, not something that I would go out and try to share with others. It's just an inner experience. In my life, I feel like I'm really at peace, I'm very fulfilled, I'm living the life I always wanted. And all of the real obstacles were inside me. One after another, those obstacles have fallen. And I'm now doing exactly what I want to do with my life, and feel extremely purposeful about it. And this is something I'd wish on anyone. It's like, I wish you well. What does that mean? Well, I wish you to be able to feel the kind of fulfillment that I feel. And I see that is starting to spread.
Well, actually, you bring up something that it could potentially be another drawback for some people, and this is the idea of mysticism. I think there's a saying that goes something like, mysticism is the realm of liars, kings, and priests, or something along those lines. Religious rulers and liars. There is a mystic sort of component to the Octologue.
Yes, there is. And I support it. The reason I support that is the fact that every great scientist was also a mystic. If you asked Albert Einstein, where do you get your most creative, important ideas? He would tell you he opened himself up for them when they came to him. Or words to that effect. I've spoken to a lot of well-known, famous scientists myself in the field of physics. In 1962, I attended a conference with a whole bunch of the ones who created quantum mechanics. And we talked. I listened to what they had to say. And basically, they had distinguished themselves for having identified a set of questions that were amenable to investigation. Knowing what the important questions are is really the basis for creativity. Come up with the right question and wonderful things will happen.
Well, I can certainly relate. I know I've read the story of Tesla.
Right.
And his kind of innovations. He's got tons of innovations and ideas and designs that to this day really haven't been realized. And so, but where did he get all these great ideas? To a large degree, that's what he said. He said they came to him in dreams.
Yes. Well, some of us believe, with some reason, that the universe is holographic in the quantum mechanical sense of the word, and that the human brain is, in fact, a quantum mechanical machine that can interact with that greater system and suck new information out of it. And we have found, in practice, in a group, a way that we can actually demonstrate this and amplify the creativity of the group. That's something that is mystical. So I do not decry mysticism as such. I decry efforts to colonize it or to make it politically advantageous. I think that's absurd. And I do think there are people who are very involved in mysticism and don't know why. They don't have a really good why.
Is mysticism really is the correct word for what it is? Because I think if you talk to people like devout Christians or religious folks, they would probably be horrified by the word mysticism. Is mysticism really the word?
Well, I'm not sufficiently stuck in my experience of Christianity to have a problem with the word mysticism. I see that's the word that John David Garcia used, and he was much more widely read than I was, so he probably got the right word. It's an experience beyond the questions and answers that science can address. That doesn't mean it always will. In the future, as scientific awareness expands, things that were mysterious in the past may come to be understood. We're part of that. We're not outside that looking at it. We're part of that. This is why when people ask me, do I have a religion, I say, well, I'm a Taoist. Because in Taoist religion, everything is connected. I enjoy feeling connected with the people around me, particularly those who themselves like feeling connected. And that takes many forms. I recommend it.
So we'll move on. In regard to the whole idea of mysticism, I guess the what we're describing is what we call the amplification. And it's essentially people sitting around in a circle and
focusing their energies together.
Focusing on a particular question,
right.
Word,
right.
subject.
And we have a procedure for doing that. We have a what do you call it? It's like an app.
But it's not like we're looking for the Word of God, and then somebody comes and speaks in tongues, and then that's the final conclusion. That's just the beginning of a formal kind of critical examination of a new idea.
If someone had, during that procedure, if someone had such an experience, I've never witnessed it, but it could happen. Someone says, oh, God is speaking to me, and he's saying blah, 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 blah. That's a possible thing that could happen in such a group. And instead of being somehow disadvantageous, the group would turn it to its advantage in some way. I can't say, there's no general way of describing what that means. But as a group, we have that potential. We can synchronize our brains to the extent that we share in the discovery. It could not have been made by any one of us alone. That is what I would call a reason for rejoicing. We made a discovery together. That kind of synchronization among people has untold possibilities in the future. I mean, I can't begin to imagine all the good things that can come out of that as that gets spread out in people's awareness.
So if Nikola Tesla had been in Octologue,
oh boy,
do you feel like let's start with like the critical version, that all his ideas would have been accepted, or would people have talked him out of those great ideas and said, that idea is just too crazy. As an individual, you have a great idea, but as a group, we can't support it. I spoke
to a great physicist once who told me that when a really, really, really important new idea comes along, it had better be crazy enough. The idea that a new idea is crazy is in its favor, rather than to be held against it, in the minds that are open to real creativity. Happened to be my father who told me this, because he was a great physicist. I was a lesser physicist than I was doing physics. He was amazing when it came to physics. He would have loved what we're doing today. If he were here today, he'd be right on board. He was ignorant in some ways, politically, naive, but honest to the core. He, when I first talked with him about religion, he said he was an atheist. Well, we discussed it, and I asked him about the evidence. What evidence do you have for the non-existence of something? It took a little while to think it through, and then he realized I don't have any evidence. Maybe you're agnostic. You're right. I guess I am. I must have been about 8 years old when we had that conversation. He was open to refreshing new ideas, even if they were totally contradictory to what he had believed previously.
Well, I think that's also something that we've become accustomed to, is kind of the labels that we put on ourselves. That we're so stuck to being something. Even an anarchist is something that there's room for interpretation, and what that exactly is a lot different to a lot of different people.
Quite right.
But talking about like being honest with yourself, I think kind of one of the baby steps to doing that is what people call journaling. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of focusing on lately, because I think it's a tool that could be used in the Octologue, or at least to the members of the Octologue, to kind of drum up the kind of questions and interest that are necessary for an Octologue. Because once a person really kind of examines themselves and examines questions that they have, and really has some questions about where their beliefs are, this is probably something that's really in the realm of journaling. Because if you tried to express an idea that just popped into your head, I guess similar to my dog analogy of subconscious, as I've written on it a little bit more, I've got a lot more, I think, a lot better at communicating what it is. But by actually writing it down and kind of thinking it through in our own head, we get to really arrange it in a way that people might understand it a lot better. And then having that question and taking it to those group of people that we trust and putting it out to them to have that discussion about, is this real, or where do you feel about that, or am I just completely off my rocker? This is the kind of discussions that can be had in the Octologue that can really further the individuals in the Octologue's understanding, productivity, I guess, in living their own life.
I totally agree. That's perfect. Perfect description of it. I love it.
Yeah, so actually this, I've been kind of thinking about this for a while, but I was just recently sent a video, and it really kind of put it all together. The idea, or the name of it is, it's a TED Talk, and it's by a young woman, and it's something about cutting out the small talk, and essentially doing something what she calls big talk. It's, instead of just having these light conversations with people that are kind of politically correct, having some really deep conversations with people. Well, how do you have that? How do you do that? Well, you need to really ask some fundamental questions that are really important to people. And so that's
you.
Yeah, and so I would highly recommend that. I'll try and post a link to that particular video in there. But I think that's also a component of the Octologue. And I think we'll probably dispel a lot of the rumors or a lot of the questions about what the Octologue could potentially be to people that just don't quite know what are the advantages, what would be the advantages of getting together versus the disadvantages that they've always been taught about organizations
Right.
and people getting together.
Right. Yes, things are very different when everyone you're working with is at your level. You don't have a boss. No one's telling you what to do. No one has the authority to tell you what to do. People might request things for you to do, and you get to decide if you're going to do them or not, or on what basis you do them, and so on. And you share a common purpose. And it becomes the potential there is for a very, very close-knit group who are very emotionally involved with each other as well as business involved, intellectually involved, etc. It brings people closer. And I think that's very much needed in today's world because we've been so alienated by design. I don't think it's natural that people are so alienated from one another as what we see in Europe and the United States. Everyone is at odds.
Yeah, I think the control mechanisms and the control system is constantly throwing out things that are divisive in nature.
Right.
So that people continually are at each other, essentially can't be comfortable with each other.
Right.
Because they have a different view on a particular thing.
Or different color skin, or some other characteristics that are distinguishable. Anything. Oh, one of these days you will have a country where it's illegal to have red hair, punishable by death. Redheads, watch out. Just because some asshole decides that something is illegal doesn't mean that's a good decision. You need to learn to hang out with people who make good decisions, kind of decisions you would like to make or have made, and come learn from us how we do this thing, because it's transforming our lives every day, and we see it's a very desirable outcome for everyone involved. It's an invitation for all.
So to wrap this up. Essentially, why I suggested this topic was, I want people to understand that we are very open to people's questions and even people's criticisms about this idea. We really want people to progress. We want people to succeed, and we feel like this is the best way to do it. And every day that it isn't done is really a day that was wasted. That we could have done more if we just done it another way. And so, putting this together and getting this out to people is something that obviously we're doing this as a podcast. We're trying to get more people under the umbrella of understanding what's going on, but this is a process of learning through experience. And so we're encouraging that, and we're also encouraging people that are trying to experience it, that if they have questions or concerns, to contact us.
Yes, we would like to help you do it as well as you possibly can.
So with that said, that's going to wrap up this episode. As far as future episodes, let me talk about a couple of topics that we had possibly discussed. We were talking about doing a little thing about the religion of the state, and it just so happened to be July 4th the other day, and so I saw a lot of that yesterday in the Facebook feed, and sure in the news. But there was another one that I came upon, I just thought about, and I think it's really going to be something that's going to be something to discuss in the future, and it's a term called psychographics. You ever heard that term, Bob?
No.
Well, it's not not about psychos. I guess I could compare it to the word demographics. You know what demographics is?
Right.
Well, with the advent of social media and all this data collection, there's companies out there typically engaged in the Psy war that have gone public now and are using that data collection and prediction elements to create advantages for large businesses and corporations to kind of contour their messages toward the psychographics, the reasons why people do things. And as they collect more data on things like Facebook and YouTube and all these things, they're actually creating a message that is much more palatable to people just based on all this data collection. And so some of the things that have come about recently are things like Trump's victory and the Brexit have been supposedly run by companies that are utilizing this data to construct a message that is pleasant to people's ears. I think actually the Trump message and Brexit is really not that big a deal, but if you look into this a little bit further, it's quite a interesting study. The thing is as I looked at the whole kind of description of this, I really thought to myself, the Octologue solves this problem right off the bat. Because again, they're trying to push people to be individuals. And by being individuals, they can kind of contour the boxes that they're in. Whereas with an Octologue, you kind of separate yourself from those individual idiosyncrasies and so forth, which I think is great. So once again, I think it's kind of a new tool that the system is developing, and we already have a solution for it. So I'm interested to talk more about that.
Okay. Any other upcoming topics?
I think that's essentially the two that excite me the most. With that said, we'll go ahead and conclude today's episode. And again, I thank all the audience for listening. If you made it this far, you are a true warrior. And we appreciate your attentiveness to the message. And stay tuned for our next one.
Thank you all. See you next time.